Hey everybody, Rob here at eTrailer.com, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Roadmaster high-powered diode wiring kit on our 2016 Cadillac Escalade. Now the reason why you might want a diode kit is if we want to flat tow our Escalade behind our motorhome so we can have a convenient way to get around once we get to the campground. But the problem comes in, we need to get our lights back here, because whether you're towing a vehicle or a trailer, we have to have those signals so when we're going down the road, everyone knows what's going on around us. Whether we're going to be changing lanes, stopping, or driving at night. Our diode kit is going to allow us to transfer those signals from our motorhome to the back of our Escalade. That way we have all those lights and signals so we can get down the road safely. Now they're going to provide us with our taillights, turn signals, and our brake lights. But with our diodes, you can see that we're using the factory taillight to get those signals out. So we're not going to have to worry about putting those magnetic lights on and running that wire all the way to the back of the motorhome, having it flap around in the wind, potentially scratching the paint. But we're also not going to have to worry about changing the way the light itself looks if we were going to use a bulb and socket kit or anything like that. This way, our Escalade is going to look exactly the way we bought it, but it's going to function the way we need to when we're flat towing it. Another big benefit to the diodes is that it's actually going to protect our vehicle. So if there was a problem with the wiring on the motorhome end, the diodes are going to prevent any kind of backfeeding because it's not going to go into our Escalade's wiring system. Now our diode kit is also going to include the cable to hook your motorhome to your Escalade to transfer all those signals. The motorhome end is going to have a 7-way, which is pretty typical on most motorhomes. And then on the car end, it's going to have a 6-way. Now they're also going to provide us with a plug to wire up and mount on the front of our Escalade. Now the cable is going to be coiled, which is really nice because once we have everything hooked up, it's going to stretch out to when we need it to when we're making turns and when the tow bar locks out. But whenever we come to a stop and we don't need all that slack, it's going to retract back down and keep it from dragging on the ground, hopefully saving the cable for a long time. And here's the 6-way plug that's going to be on the front of our Escalade. We mounted ours to our base plate that had a couple prongs coming out here. But as you can see, it's going to have a nice spring-loaded door to keep all that moisture and debris out of the inside, so we shouldn't have to worry about too much corrosion or anything building up in there. Our diode kit is going to come with everything you need to get it installed. It's going to come with that plug in the front, the umbilical cord, all the connectors, diodes, and wiring. But our Escalade is a rather long vehicle, so I do suggest picking up a little bit of 16-gauge wire, and you can find that here at eTrailer.com. When we begin the install, some customers may be a little bit nervous because we are going to have to tap into our vehicle's taillight wiring. Now, if you look at the taillight, it is rather large, and I know that some people may be nervous trying to get this out. But fortunately, I found a way that we don't have to remove the taillight, but we can still access all the wires. In fact, let's go ahead and bring it in the shop, and we'll do it together. To start our installation, first thing I want to mention, clearly we don't have the fascia on our Escalade, and that's because we just got done installing our base plate. Now that is going to be the best time to install all your other components, that way we don't have to fight any plastic and the fascia and the bumper trying to route everything and get our components in place. So I would suggest doing your wiring when you're doing your base plate at the same time. And we're going to start at the front. Our base plate has a spot where we can mount our connector for the front. You just want to make sure you leave yourself enough slack on the front of your Escalade where you're going to be mounting your plug and start routing your wire towards the back of the taillights. Now with ours, we just went straight back to the base plate. We started coming over towards the driver's side, routing it up into the engine bay. Now once we got our wire into the engine bay, I left a loop, and now this is just going to be a loop of that 4-pole wire that we left because some braking systems may need to tap into this wiring. Now if yours doesn't, it's still not a bad idea to come into the engine bay, leave yourself a little bit of slack, but then we just started routing it along the edge, and once we got to the firewall, we dropped our wire straight down so we could avoid the front axle, any moving parts, or any major heat sources. So when I dropped it down right behind the front tire here. You can see where I have it zip tied to this existing wiring here. Now the only reason why I really stayed to the outside of the frame is because right underneath the engine bay, we have our exhaust really close to the frame right here. So I opted to stay on the outside of the frame, follow the electrical wires that are already there, securing them. That way I didn't have to worry about the wire getting melted, charred, or any kind of damage to it because of the exhaust here. I just zip tied my wiring along the outside of the frame here to all this existing wiring and lines, and I just followed it as far back as I could get it up until we got to about this rear body mount. And once we got to this body mount, we made sure to go over the top of it. That way it wouldn't get caught on anything. And then just continued to come back all the way until we got to the very last body mount, which is pretty close to the end of our fuel tank here. Then we pushed our wire over the top of the frame and continued to go back. And then once we got to the rear springs, we went over all of that and the cross members, so we didn't have to worry about any kind of damage or interference with the wire. Went over all of our braces, and we went to the outside of the frame, and we have our wire hanging down right here. Now that we have our wire at the very back, we need to separate each one of these wires so there'll be 4 individual wires rather than them all bundled together. And the easiest way you can do that is if you take a pair of cutters, we're just going to go right in between each one of the wires. We just want to cut just a little bit just to kind of get it started. And you want to try your best not to damage the wire. You want to get in between them. But then we can just start pulling the wires apart, and we want to go as high up to the last anchor point as we can get. Now that we have our 4 wires separated and they're individual now, we need to get ready to start testing our taillight signals. However, if we want to test them behind the taillight, there is a pretty lengthy process in order to get the taillights out, which will involve removing a lot of different panels. Fortunately for us though, if we just move a little bit further back from where we were, we're actually going to have our taillight connector at the bottom of our truck. This wire is going to go up into the housing and connect directly to the taillight, so we can actually get all of our signals from this plug right here. Now we are going to have another one on the other side of our Escalade that's going to be in the same spot at the bottom, right underneath where our taillights would be. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this connector down. Just held on by a plastic clip. But we're going to go ahead and pull the connector down on the other side, and we want to turn on our headlights so that our taillight function is working, but we don't want any other signals on. So if somebody's in there, tell them not to push on the brake, don't turn on the turn signals. We want just the taillight signal running right now. So with our connector loose, I want to find that little red tab on there. We're going to slide it away from the connector. Now since these are on the bottom of our Escalade, there is a good chance that these connectors are pretty tight, got a little bit of dirt in there, and they're really not going to want to come apart. So what we can do is you can take a really small flat blade screwdriver. I'm using my circuit tester here, but if we just come, we want to pry that little red tab out and away from the connector. Again, with all that dirt in there, it can be a little bit of a tight fit. They don't really want to move too well. But we need to get that locking tab loose, pulled away like that, and then we're going to press down on that black tab and separate the 2 connectors. Now again, since these are on the bottom on the outside, dirt gets in them and they like to stick together really well and not really like to come apart. So again, you take a really small screwdriver. If we come in from the opening side, should be able to kind of work it in there to help release that clip and separate the 2 connectors. Now the other side is going to work the same way with the locking tab and that black button, but again, you just want to take your time and try to work them loose because we don't want to break or damage the locking tabs or the connectors themselves. But now we want to put our taillight function on, so I have my headlights turned on. I'm going to take my circuit tester and I'm going to test each one of these pins to see which one's going to be my taillight circuit. So it looks like it's going to be the second pin from the right-hand side if that little locking tab's on top. So if we look at the back of the connector, it'll be the purple wire on the driver's side. Now we want to write that down or remember that, and that's going to be our taillight signal on the driver's side. Move over to the passenger side and verify the location and color of the wire. So over on the passenger side connector, we're going to do the same process of testing. And you want to verify the location and color of wire. So this time it's actually the second from the left-hand side with the locking tab on top. And if we look at our color wire, looks like it's going to be the white wire with the grayish or tan stripe on it. So again, we want to write that down or remember that, and then we're going to turn our taillight signal off, and we want an extra set of hands to apply the brakes. So now we're going to be testing for our brake signal. Now again, we want to isolate that, so you want to make sure that no other light functions are running right now. Start going through with my tester. And it looks like the only pin we're getting any voltage on is the third pin from the left. So if we look at the color wire, it's going to be right next to our taillight wire, and on the passenger side, it's going to be the solid white wire. We're going to go over to the driver's side and verify the color and location of the wire we're going to be using over there. Now on the driver's side connector, if we check, it's actually going to be on the third pin from the right, if we look at it and have that locking tab on top. So if we look back, it's still going to be in this right next to our taillight wire, which, remember, our taillight wire is purple. So our brake signal wire is going to be the gray wire with that really faint yellow stripe on it. But now that we have all of our wires identified, we want to remove this loom material and the tape to expose those wires underneath. So at this point, you want to make sure all the light functions are off and you don't have anything accidentally left on, because we don't want to cause any fuses to blow. But we're going to find our brake signal wire, and we'll start on the driver's side. I'm going to come downstream just a bit from the connector. We're going to cut that wire directly in half. I'm going to strip back both ends. And once you have it stripped, you want to grab one of the diodes that has all blue spade terminals on it. Then we're going to take two off. Doesn't matter which one. And we want to crimp on the spade terminal onto the end of the wire we just stripped. Do that for both of the ends. I'm going to take the diode that has that one last spade connector on it. We can go ahead and pull it off. Now if we pay attention to our diode, you'll see that there's going to be two terminals on one side and one on the other. The two are going to be on the inside, and the single terminal is going to be on the outside. We want the single one to go towards the connector, or closest to our taillight. So we'll plug in that connector. Make sure it fits nice and snug, it's not going to come out. And we'll take the other side, and we just want to plug it into one of the terminals. Really doesn't matter which one. So we should just have our diode going in between the connector and the rest of the harness here. And we're going to take our yellow wire, and I always like to make sure I have enough room, so I kind of mock things up. I'll bring my connector and just kind of loosely put it together. Get a rough idea about how much wire I'm going to need. It's always a good idea to give yourself a little bit of extra, so I'll give myself a little bit of slack, then I'll cut the wire, trim off the excess. I'll strip back the end of it, and I'll crimp on that last blue spade terminal. And then this wire is going to plug right into the last terminal on our diode. So now when we look at it, we should have two sources of power coming into our diode going out to our taillight. Now our taillight wire is going to be very, very, very similar to our brake light wire, except this time we want to grab the diode that has the yellow connector on it. But for now, we'll take the two blue ones off. We'll cut our purple wire in half and do the same thing we did with our brake light function wire. Cut that wire in half, strip back both ends. And we'll crimp on those blue spade terminals. And just like before, terminal closest to the plug is going to go into the outside, the single one. Then the other wire is just going to go into one of the other terminals on the outside. And then the other side of the wire is just going to go one of the terminals on the inside of the diode. So the same thing, we're going to estimate about how much brown wire we're going to need. And I always, again, like to give myself a little bit of slack. So we'll cut our brown wire, except now we want to make sure that we hold on to the excess wire and strip back the end coming that we routed up front and the excess, have two bare ends of wire there. Now the whole reason why they gave us that yellow connector is because they want us to combine these wires together, and it's going to make a pretty thick wire, and I don't think both of these would fit inside one of those blue spade terminals, so it's really just there to make it easier for us to crimp the connector in place. Make sure both wires are fully seated in there. Crimp it down. Then we'll take our brown wire, put it into the last terminal on our taillight diode. Now we want to take our green wire and the excess brown wire, and we're going to route it over the frame above our spare tire, and we're going to go over to the passenger side, and our brown wire will hook up to our taillight wire, and the green one is going to hook up to the brake signal on the passenger side. Now you may find that your brown wire may not reach all the way over to the passenger side. If that is the case, you're going to want to pick up some 16 gauge wire. You can find some here at eTrailer.com, and Roadmaster is going to include a butt connector in your kit. Now I went ahead and just took an excess length of brown wire I had laying around and attached it, and as you can see, I didn't need that much, but it is going to make it a little bit easier if you just have a couple extra feet. And then I just put some electrical tape around the butt connector, since it is on the outside of the vehicle, to help protect it against any kind of corrosion or moisture getting inside that connection. But over on the passenger side, we have our diodes hooked up. So now we just want to take some time, clean up all of our excess wires. We can plug our connectors back in, and then use the double-sided tape on the back of the diodes to secure those. Again, you just want to take some time, clean up any loose wires, and kind of make it a nice, neat little package underneath here, and plug your connectors back in. So we should have one more wire left at the back of our Escalade, and that's going to be the white wire. Now this is going to be our ground wire, so we either need to find an existing ground back here, or we can use the self-tapping screw and attach it to some sheet metal. Now fortunately for us, we're right behind this last body mount, or in front of rather, towards the front of the vehicle, and we have a really easy access to the frame. So that's going to be a really good grounding point. So we can take our cutters, go ahead and cut the excess wire off of our white wire, strip back the end of it. We want to grab the small ring terminal out of our kit, clip it onto the end of our wire. Give it a quick tug, make sure it's secure. Then we want to grab a 5/16 nut driver and the self-tapping screw that's in our kit. And I always like to start the hole first. That way I don't have to worry about the wire getting wrapped up around the drill. So let's move it out of the way for now. Coming right at the side of the frame, I'm just going to drill a hole and get the screw to go into the side of the frame rail here. Now that we have our hole made, I'll remove the screw, make sure that it goes through my ring terminal, and then make sure it goes in and tightens up back through the hole. Now whenever you are tightening these self-tapping screws up, you want to make sure they're nice and snug to where the ring terminal isn't going to move. But at the same time, you don't want to strip it out, crank it down on so much that it's not going to grab anymore. So it's nice and secure, my ring terminal is secure, so we don't have to crank on down anymore. So now that we have our fascia back in, and our diodes are in place in the back, we can wire up the plug. Now our kit is going to come with a 6-way round connector. We can go ahead and pull the dust cap off, and it'll expose all the terminals on the back side. You want to take the dust cap cover with a boot. We're just going to slide it back out of the way for now. Just kind of push it back behind the fascia. we don't have to worry about it. But we need to separate our wires so that we have 4 individual wires that we're working with. Now we don't need to go all the way back. We maybe just need an inch, 2 inches or so, just enough to work with. So again, we'll just take our cutters, come right in between each one of those lines, being really careful not to cut into the wire itself. And just peel back, give ourselves enough room to work with each one. And once you have all of those cut back, we're going to strip back the ends of each wire. Now if we look at the back of our plug, we're going to notice that each one of these terminals is labeled. Now if we start at the very top, at the 12 o'clock position, we labeled TM, that's for trailer marker, or that's going to be our brown wire. Now if we move over to counterclockwise, the next one is going to be a different size. It's going to say GD, that's going to be ground, or our white wire. Next one going counterclockwise is going to say LT for left turn, that'll be our yellow wire. Next one will be RT for right turn, and that'll be our green wire. Now the 2 terminals left over, the next one is going to be labeled S. That's going to be your electric brake signal. And the pin in the center is going to be your 12-volt power source if you have an auxiliary power source. Just so you know, because there is 2 different standards. Now you'll notice there's going to be a really small screw on the terminals, and that's going to be the set screw so we can put the wire in. So you want to grab yourself a super small Phillips head screwdriver. We'll loosen up the screw. You don't want to take it all the way out though, because they're super easy to lose and very small. We'll just take the corresponding wire. Make sure all the strands of copper get inside the terminal. And I always like to leave just a little bit of the copper sticking out of the top once I get it into the terminal. Just a tiny bit coming out of the top, just like that. And then I'll tighten it down. That way I know that I'm going to have a good connection inside, and I don't have to worry about the insulation giving us any kind of intermittent connections. But we're just going to go through continuing hooking up the remaining wires in the correct terminals. Once you have all your wires attached, we can slide the boot back over. Now I like to take some electrical tape, and not only am I going to attach the tape wrapping the boot up, but I'm also going to wrap up as much of this wire as I can. So it'll kind of help hold the boot in place, protect the wires, and hide the color on the front of our Escalade so we don't see these bright yellow, green, and white wires. So I'm just going to tape as far up as I can and then tuck the excess back behind the bumper. With our wires secure, I'm going to grab a couple self-tapping screws that came with our base plate. I'm going to secure my electrical connector to the bracket right here on the front. Now the final step of our installation is going to be testing our diodes and making sure that all the circuits are working properly. Now I have mine hooked up to my tester, that way I can simulate my motorhome, but at the same time isolate the circuits so I know if there is a problem, it's on the Escalade end. If I turn on my tester, you can see the taillight function is working, as well as the left turn signal, my brake lights, and my right turn signal.